I drowned. And then I was out of my body and in this absolute darkness. And then I saw this speck of light.
Just reached his hand out. And when I went to touch it, boom, we immediately started flying.
I was in the most beautiful garden I have ever seen or experienced.
Now energies are hitting us and forcing us to wake up.
I want everyone to know that they are never, ever alone. I have guides, and that's wonderful, and I can see mine. But so do you and everyone listening.
Dying is hard, but coming back to life is even harder. I love diving. That was, for me, it was my dream job to be a commercial diver. And not only on top of that, but I got to be the chief engineer of the research where we did the diving. So it was a double win for me. But on the day that I had my near-death experience, we had just evaluated a new ROV, remote-operated vehicle. And it was storming, and it was getting worse. And so we made a run for the harbor. But the harbor master refused our ship entry because there was 25 to 30-foot breakers at the breakwater. But we had some people on board that one of the design engineers for this submarine that we were evaluating needed to get to LAX. This is on the California coast, and we're up north. And so we decided to put, one of what we recover our submarines with, which was a rubber Zodiac, in the water, and we started heading in. And as we were heading in, we would go up on the top of a swell, and because 2 miles offshore, they're not breakers or anything, just swells at that stage. We go up on the top of a swell, try to take a bearing on the harbor buoy, and then ride the trough and go up and repeat it all over. And all of a sudden, we drove right off a 25, 30-foot breaker. And we caught some air. And I yelled at him to turn about so that we could go back out to sea, because we were in a breaker zone. This is a very dangerous place to be with a boat, So he turned us around really quickly, but then all of a sudden I looked up, and there was the next one that came right down on top of us, and it folded that Zodiac in half like a peanut butter sandwich. I was in the bow, and it catapulted me right into the sea. And so I'm hanging on to, this was an old World War II vintage kind of life vest. It was incredibly violent. And I know it pushed me down deep because I could feel, I had to relieve the pressure in my ears a couple times. So I knew I was down pretty deep, and I was waiting for this old Mae West to, carry me up to the surface. And, I knew as a commercial diver, I knew I could hold my breath for about 3 minutes, which is a good long time. Try doing it. So I'm trying to let Mae West carry me to the surface. And, it didn't happen. And eventually the euphoria of oxygen deprivation takes over, and you breathe. And I drowned. I immediately, there was just a second of burning salt water going into my lungs. And then I was out of my body and in this absolute darkness. But only it was absolutely quiet. It wasn't, 25, 30-foot seas is incredibly loud. It's like roaring, Suddenly it's quiet. It's peaceful. I don't feel like I'm being tumbled and tossed. And this was in March. It's extremely cold water. I'm not cold anymore. I'm comfortable. I just feel like I'm just suspended in this blackness. But also, I didn't really feel alone. I felt like there was a presence. It's very hard to describe, but it felt like, that everything is involved in this blackness, this darkness. And so, like many people that go in, a lot of times they call this the void. Many people that experience the void, a lot of times it's frightening. It can be a scary place if suddenly you're in this absolute darkness, totally suspended, right? But for me, I just came from this violence, this incredible violence where I was being tumbled and tossed like crazy, and to find myself in this absolute calm and quiet. And as a commercial diver, we're trained to recognize oxygen deprivation and the danger signs and all that. And this has gone way beyond that, my training. And so I was curious. I was incredibly curious as to, where am I? What's going on? And then I saw this speck of light, and it was the only thing to look at in this darkness. And so you're just kind of drawn to it. And as I paid attention and put awareness on this light, I felt like suddenly there was movement toward the light. And to this day, I don't know if I was moving toward it, it was moving toward me, but there was movement toward this light. And as I got closer and closer, I started feeling these waves of love. I felt almost like a warm embrace. I was just mystified by this. And so I kept getting closer and closer. And the closer I got, I started to recognize that the light itself wasn't just a beam of light. It was millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all in movement. And they were, if you've ever seen like a school of fish, when they're all balled up together, and suddenly they'll take a change of direction and they all shift at the same time. And you can see all the different multitudes of colors in their scales and that sort of thing. Well, all these fragments of light were multiple, colors. They all had that same kind of movement. And I was just in awe. I was just in awe of what I was experiencing. And I kept getting closer and closer and closer. And I was feeling more loved and loved. And and so eventually 3 fragments broke away and they started approaching me, coming toward me. And as they did, I understood. It was a clear sense of communication, but I understood that they were welcoming me home. And I was just overwhelmed with this love and this welcoming that I was receiving. And eventually a dozen of these light fragments came, and they were all greeting me. And I realized that at this point that I had become a fragment of light. And they communicated with me that we were going to go deeper into the light. And as we did, we went into this area. To me, it felt very spherical, a big giant ball, and we went inside. And once we got inside, it was like I started reliving my life. And it wasn't like watching a movie screen or anything as simple as that. It was much more involved because it felt like I was reliving it, but not only from my point of view, but from everyone I'd ever interacted with from their point of view. And so that was mind-blowing, to say the least. And so again, I was in absolute awe. But then I started to realize what I was watching, and that I also realized that this group of beings that greeted me, that came into this area, the sphere with me, were experiencing it the same way I was. So they were reliving my life through my life review. That's what it really is, a life review. And so I was like, I was a little, because I was a brash young man. I was really a brash young man. I really didn't care about other people's points of view. I was very self-involved, and so we started experiencing, because this is more experiencing, because it's not just my point of view, but it's like my consciousness fragmented into these multiple streams, and I'm experiencing it from whoever I've interacted with, their point of view. It was just multidimensional viewing this life, and I did. I was very self-involved, so I stepped over people, I ran over people. I really didn't care, but my soul family was experiencing this the same way I was, because that's what I call them now, is my soul family. And I was a little bit ashamed of some of the things that I was doing, but they weren't. They were just loving me, supporting me, and just observing. There was no judgment whatsoever. It was just observation of what was going on. The judgment that was happening within me more than anything. And I got to see things in a way that just, again, in awe. I was in absolute awe, where I would see things that I did with just pure loving intention, without any thought of something for myself. Those would create these incredible ripples. When I did something that, like I had a huge ego, all right? And something that really fed my ego, like becoming the chief engineer of a research vessel in my mid-20s, that was incredible for me, meant very little in the near-death experience. It caused the least amount of ripples, okay? But when I did something with loving intention for someone, it created these immense ripples of after effects, So I was, so I got to see this, and I got to, kind of try to figure out, the meaning of all of this that's going on all around me, the multiple streams of input that I was receiving. And then we got to a point where I started seeing things that I didn't have reference for in my lifetime. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was seeing my future potential. And it disoriented me a little bit, but my I call them my soul family. They supported me. They loved me. They buoyed me up so that we could experience this potential that was available to me. And it was like looking down a corridor where everything in front of you was crystal clear, just like the life review was everything, and everything that I re-experienced in my life was absolutely clear. Once we got into future potential life, it was just the very central path seemed clear. But on the periphery, you could see there was other aspects that and it felt like, if I wanted to, I could go this way or I could go that way, but it felt like I was always drawn to this crystal clear central path. And so as we proceeded down, I got to see and experience, because it's more than seeing, it was experiencing this potential future. But I finally reached this one point where the light itself, these millions upon millions of fragments of light spoke in unison, and I perceived this to be God, spoke to me, and it said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I said, "No way." So I was arguing with what I perceived as God. I said, "No, I've got a family that loves me like I've never been loved before, because my family on earth was, pretty dysfunctional. And so I'm feeling loved like I've never felt before. I don't want to go back to that body. That body is just broken for me." And so the light again, it spoke one more time. It said, "You must return. You have a purpose." And it was with this parental voice that was just so loving. And the word purpose just resonated. It just resonated through my being. And with that, and because we're in this light, where we have this ability to, it's like we're connected to all the souls that ever were and all the souls that ever will be. So you have this expansive consciousness that's available to you. And that word purpose just resonated through my body, and I understood it. And it was simple, it was efficient, and the only option was to just come to acceptance that, yes, this is what really needs to happen. And with that, I found myself outside my body, and it's still in the breaker zone. There's an area in the wave cycles that you can get caught up and just keep spinning and spinning. And so my body is caught up in this like vortex underwater, deep. And but I'm standing outside my body, and the three original light beings that greeted me were with me, and we're watching my body. And some of the wreckage from the zodiac, and specifically the bow line, had come in close proximity to my body, and it started to wrap itself around my arm, and all of a sudden another set of waves hit, and when they did, there was some air left in one of the pontoons of the zodiac. The zodiac popped up, and when it did, it cinched that line around my arm, and it pulled my body up. And when it did, I got tangled up in the wreckage of this zodiac and what was left of it, And I'm watching this. I'm not in my body. I'm just observing this. And because I had this sense of calm and a bit of, I have to say, almost like mystery of how is the enormity of my light being going to fit in that body. And that's what I was pondering while all of this was going on. And another set of waves came, and they started pounding my body up against the wreckage. And when it did, it pushed some of that salt water out of my lungs. And at that moment, that's when my soul family gave me a gentle push, and I felt this vibration as I came back into my body and came back into physical awareness, but I still felt like I was half here and half there. So I had a little bit of that expansive awareness, but it was like evaporating, It messed with my mind for a long time, because to be in the right place, to be pushed up against that wreckage, in order for it to push some of that salt water out so that I could be resuscitated by the ocean and by being pounded up against this wreckage. That's not common. That really messed with my mind for a long time, because I was like, okay, then that means there's and I knew there was a purpose, because I saw that. So this miraculous resuscitation had purpose behind it. And so I'm in my body, I'm on the surface, but I'm having trouble, staying on the surface, because and I'm coughing up, salt water, and I'm just thinking purpose, what this purpose. And it was like it was evaporating. It was like sand through my fingers. I couldn't hang on to it. It was, and so, and I started to hear my mates that were in the Zodiac with me when we had this accident. They had stayed on station, and one of them had held onto a flashlight. How he held onto a flashlight, I'll never know. But he was, they were sweeping, the ocean when it would go between waves into a trough. They would, sweep it to see if they could find me. They were looking for me, and so those guys, those are my heroes, because they stayed on station in a very dangerous zone. Okay, and they found me, and I was trying to yell back, because they were yelling for me and stuff like that. And I was trying to yell back, but you can't after you've swallowed all that salt water and everything. And so I squeaked and squawked, and eventually they found me and they swam over, and then we all had a mile to swim in. But I kept going under. But I still had this awareness, a greater awareness than I normally have in my physical life, that there was something wrong with the life vest that I was wearing. And so I popped it open, and I looked at it. This is nighttime. You got to realize this is nighttime. It's very dark. You got huge waves crashing. Everything you do is hard. But I looked at it, and there was fiber lining just all over the place. And so what happened was the life vest failed, basically, and it became saturated with salt water, and it was actually what was keeping me from staying on the surface. So I ditched the life vest, and I could stay up and hang on to what was left of the Zodiac, because it was afloat. And all of us gathered around, which is the smart thing to do in a water emergency, is to rally together to support each other, and we all swam that last mile in together. But I like to say, dying is hard, but coming back to life is even harder, because that reality on the other side was hyper real. It was incredibly real. And then this life feels more dreamlike to me ever since. It's always felt a little more dreamlike than that reality. That reality was so incredibly, detailed. And we have that extra ability. Our consciousness is so much greater than what we have available here. And so you feel dense. It feels dense to come back, But, once we came back, my mates, they popped my shoulder back in, and my thumb, which got dislocated when that line pulled me up. Then, we had to find our way home and stuff like that. But it was a really rough night. These experiences can give people after effects, and the after effects that I experienced was suddenly I could look into someone's eyes, and I would see their light. I could see their fragment of light. And then I also started seeing auras. At the time, I didn't even know what an aura was. To me, I called them life force energies, because it was like, I don't know what this is. And it wasn't something that I'd ever read about or experienced, And I was pretty science-based individual. And then the third thing that really freaked me out was suddenly I would get these knowings. I don't know how to express it any better than I would just know things. And it wasn't something that I'd studied in school. It wasn't something that I'd learned in training. It wasn't something I experienced in life. So where did this knowledge come from? It was kind of like these little downloads. They started out as just little whispers of downloads, and then they started getting more intense and more detailed. But it freaked me out, and I wanted my old life back. I didn't know what this was. I didn't know what to do with it. I'd never heard of anything like this. So I felt really isolated because I tried to share it with my first wife, the wife that I had during that time, and she freaked out. And so I felt like I couldn't share it with her. And death, when we did underwater research, it was very dangerous work back in the 80s. And so to talk about that I had died was kind of a taboo subject as far as my reasoning was. And so I didn't feel like I could share it with my mates. I couldn't share it with my wife. So I just self-isolated. And I just tried to take what I could accept from this experience. The things that I could accept was I was in my mid-20s. So to have this life review where you're feeling all this love, but you get to see who you really are. You get to see all these interactions and, the good, the bad, the ugly. You get to see it all. And so I realized I could be a better person. And so acceptance, I called it acceptance, that I could accept this is who I am and I can be better because some of what I saw I didn't like. And so the other thing was I also saw that I wasn't a very tolerant person. And so I saw that, a lot of times people are going to cross our paths in life and we're not going to agree with their choices and a lot of times, we react with ego, we react with a lot of different things. And so, but I saw that, their life choices are their own. I don't, I could be tolerant that they're their choices. They're not mine. They're their choices. So, and the situations that we find ourselves in life, many times, we're not happy with where we are with our lot in life, right? Well, we could be tolerant that we can make change. We can move forward and we can make change, and we can be tolerant of those that cross our paths because it's their life choices. And so acceptance of myself and where I am, tolerance of others, that was huge for me because remember, I was a self-involved kind of guy that if you crossed my path and you weren't going in the same direction, I'd either go around you or through you one way or the other. So to have suddenly acceptance of myself and tolerance of others was a huge shift. And the third thing that I took from this experience was because I was an engineer, I saw things pretty black and white. And suddenly I saw that there's a truth that resides within us. That's our personal truth. And so it's not just the factual truth, because as an engineer, that's what I dealt with was factual truths, hard and fast, hard and cold, facts and things like that. But there's also a truth that resonates within our heart, and we feel it in our heart a lot of times. And I call that personal truth. And so those three things, acceptance, tolerance, and truth, kind of became my mantra. The rest of it, talking to what I perceived as God, a soul family, life review, but all of that I tried to box up and put away. Because I wanted to get on with my life because I didn't feel like I had anybody to share it with, and I didn't want to. And I also felt like I was going nuts. So you got to deal with it somehow. And so that was my way of dealing with it, was to try to forget about it. But I could accept those three things because it stays with you. That's the problem it's not really a problem, but what happens after these experiences, they stay with you. It's like a part of your everyday now. And 11 years later, I had a second experience. Yeah, I was meditating, and I was told to return to the light. I relived the entire experience. Only this time, I had lived 11 years beyond the initial near-death experience. And in those 11 years, I got this, in the life review, I got to see how much I had really changed. And so after that second experience, they call it a near-death-like experience. That, if you got to put it in a category, that's what they call it. What I learned from that was I had to accept the entire experience. I couldn't just cherry pick acceptance, tolerance, and truth. I just couldn't cherry pick. I had to really, honor the entire experience and start to bring it into my reality. One of the things that I saw in my near-death experience when I was looking down that corridor of my future life was that I was going to have cancer. Well, in my 40s, so a few years went by, and I'd had that second experience, and then I'd also had a number of small experiences that helped me to really integrate these spiritual experiences. But I always knew that I was going to have cancer at some point because I saw it in the life review. But I thought it was going to happen, like in my doties, maybe 80s, 90s, something like that, But all of a sudden in my 40s, I'm sitting at my desk. I quit my life at sea. I started working as a manager in dialysis at a hospital. And I'm sitting at my office, and suddenly my back felt like it exploded. I mean, I was just viewing everything through this red haze of pain. Fortunately, here I am working as a manager in a hospital. So I told my director, I went into her office because I was supposed to have a meeting with her. I said, I'm going to go to the ED. I'm in a lot of pain. And so I went to the emergency department. I presented myself. They did x-rays. They did a whole bunch of stuff. They did a bunch of tests. And I'm in a emergency room, and the nurse comes in. Now, this nurse I personally knew, because she was one of my secretaries while she's going to nursing school. And so she comes in, and there's tears in her eyes, and she's like, "Oh, Dave, the doctor's going to be in here in a minute." And I recognize that moment from my life review. I had seen that in the life review. And so I had had enough of spiritual experiences that by this point, I was like, wow, I know what's going to happen. I know when he comes through the door, he's going to come in, he's going to kind of be hemming and hawing and just, kind of, how do I present that this guy, has terminal cancer? And so he's kind of like reluctant when he comes in. And sure enough, he comes in and she's teary-eyed, and I'm, telling her, "Oh, don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And so when the doctor finally tells me, he's like, "We'll make you as comfortable as possible because this is really severe." And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I saw I was going to have cancer, but I also saw I was going to live beyond it. But I wasn't prepared for a really bad case of cancer, And so there was a moment where it was like, wow, this could be my ticket home. I could go to the other side. But also there was the other side where I had seen I was going to have cancer, but I also saw I was going to live beyond it, and that there was a great purpose in the living beyond it. So I was like, so they wanted to do a whole bunch more tests, which they did. They were just going to give me morphine and Percocet and told me to get my affairs in order. That was in the emergency room, and in the workup while they were working up, the bone studies and all this stuff. But anyway, I because they found I had lesions not only in my lungs, but it had metastasized into my spine, ate away 2.5 bones of my thoracic, and my spine had collapsed because the tumor could no longer support the weight of my spine. And they found lesions in my hip, my brain, and my kidneys. So it was stage 4. It was rapidly expanding, and they didn't feel there was much use in treating it. But I disagreed, because if I can say no to God, I can say no to these doctors. That's no sweat. So I picked my care team, and we started treating it. But I also balanced it out with some holistic approaches, because I had a very strong spiritual guidance, and so I didn't like the morphine and Percocet, because when I was really dosed heavy, especially with the morphine, I couldn't hear spirit. I couldn't hear, my spirit communication got cloudy, and I couldn't hear it. And so that disturbed me more than the actual cancer. So I had some amazing experiences. One I would call an angelic experience, where I saw how to get off of the morphine and use more of mindfulness to control the pain, so that I would have the clarity to be able to communicate, have my spirit communication. That was critical in my life, and so I needed that in order to determine how I was going to overcome the cancer. I was very fortunate that within 6 months, I was on chemo and radiation at the same time. And within 6 months, my spirit guidance was telling me that things had improved. And I asked if they would do another PET scan, because that shows all the active cancer cells, and they, begrudgingly, it took a little bit of convincing, because in their reality, I was on the road to the grave, and they didn't even want to treat me, but it was because I have patient rights. I was able to get the treatment that I wanted, and so they thought that these were extra unnecessary measures, and that the testing would just be something else. And so they were trying to keep me, comfortable. They were trying to reduce stress and stuff. So they felt another test that just showed that I was dying of cancer wouldn't be good for me. So they kind of put it off. But then I insisted, and I got my test, but then nobody read the results for nobody wanted to read the results, because they didn't want to give me the bad news. They were in their minds, they were being compassionate, but but anyway, they eventually, I was able to convince. There was a nurse in the oncology unit where I was getting treated, that his brother worked for me in dialysis, and so I knew him. And so I said, hey, I couldn't look at my own chart, but I said, would you look at the results of that exam, that PET scan, and let me know. He says, well, I can't let you know, but I can let your doctor know. And so he told my doctor, and then the doctor came in, and he goes, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. We've got some great results. We're going to do some more tests. And I said, well, I'll do some more tests, but we're going to stop treatment, because I know the cancer's gone. And so they wanted to continue treatment, and I stopped the treatment. I said, I don't need to. Cancer's gone. I'm going to go on with my life. And I had to live with a collapsed spine for almost a year before they would agree to even do the surgeries. I live now with a titanium construct to rebuild my spine, and I lost the feeling in my feet and my hands. So I'm very severely disabled, and I live with pain, because the titanium and the bone don't like, they don't expand and contract the same rate. So they create a lot of pain, but that's my life, but I choose not to allow that to keep me from living life. In life, it's kind of like a pendulum in a lot of ways. In life, a lot of times we have, when we're dealing with our humanness, okay, the things, paying the rent, getting on with life, things that, are just purely human, our pendulum kind of swings to the human side. And so that fragment of light, because I believe that we carry a fragment of that light, but the totality of our light still resides in the oneness with all the other fragments of light. I call that oneness. And so we carry a fragment of our totality with us, but it expands and contracts as we need. So when we're dealing with our human side, our fragment of light isn't that much, it's a smaller percentage. But then when we swing our pendulum to the spiritual side, then that fragment just naturally expands as needed. It's there for us to draw upon. But most of the time, we feel like we're these separate individuals forging our life all by ourselves. So we don't realize that we have this available to us. And what I've learned is that when we touch that light, we can go back into the light. And when we do, we have the ability then to expand our consciousness a little bit and then come back and live our life, and bring more of that loving intention with us. After you have those experiences, you feel this duality of your spiritual self and your human self, but bringing it together is what every experiencer really wants. And also, then you start to realize that there's this interconnectedness that we all reside in. And, but we don't talk about that either, So, but experiencers feel that. They know that we're interconnected. We've experienced it on the other side, that we have this, this ability to connect to one another, but we're within this veil of separateness where we feel like we're separate individuals. But meanwhile, we're constantly sharing energy. You and I are sharing energy right now while we're talking. I'm sharing a little bit, a fragment of my light experience with you, and you're experiencing it in your way. And so we exchange this all the time, this interconnectedness that we all have. But we don't talk about it. It's not part of our everyday understanding or the way that we try to live our life.
When I was 5 years old, I had my first experience. Actually, I woke up in the middle of the night and my grandfather was standing at the foot of my bed. And I'd only met him once before. And he said, "Look, I have some things that I want you to tell my father, his son, because I'm moving on." And so he gave me a message, and I got out of bed and I walked into my parents' room. And just as I come around the corner, my mother sits up in bed and says, "What are you doing?" Because it's 2:00 in the morning. And at the same time, the phone rings next to my father's bed. And I find out later on that it was the hospital calling to say that my grandfather had just passed. And my mother turned to me and said, "Look, go back to bed." And I said, "Well, That was the very first time, and my parents recognized that I did have a connection to the other side. When I was 14 or 15, my parents recognized that I had this ability and it was interfering with my normal life. And so they sent me to a private funded psychic research center in 1974. And I did past life regression and time suspension and all of these things as a teenager in the early 70s. About 14 years ago, I ended up getting incredibly ill and struggled for about a year, to the point where I started to have really serious health problems, and then ended up being hospitalized 5 different times in about a 3 or 4 month period of time. Became allergic to all Western medicine. Once they even gave me drugs in the hospital and I coded out. I felt myself just leaving my body, and they couldn't help me. I couldn't find a way. And then it got to this evening. It was actually January 1st, 14 years ago. 1:00 in the morning, I woke up and there's a 10-foot tall spirit standing at my bed. And having been around this most of my life, I was sort of irreverent. I just thought, gosh, I'm really glad I have high ceilings. I mean, I didn't connect to the reality of it at all, right? And I just thought, well, okay. So I kind of semi-woke up, I thought, and said, what do you want? What are you doing here? And it was this huge white being. And he just, they don't talk. It's not about conversation. But energetically, he said, "I've come to let you know that I will be returning. And I have some things I want to discuss with you and show you and whatever. And I thought, okay, I don't know how you got in here, but fine, go away. And went back to bed. And about 3 or 4 hours later, I woke up and I started to get incredibly ill. And so ill that I ended up in the hospital again, and was going down fast. And they couldn't figure it out. And they couldn't give me any drugs. They listed all the things I was allergic to. They couldn't help me, sent me home, packed me up, and went about 10 more days. And I could feel it starting to wane suddenly. I thought, oh, I might survive this. And that night I woke up again at 1:00 in the morning, and there he was standing at my bed again. And I said, no, No. Last time you were here, no. I don't want to. I don't want this. I don't want to die. I don't want to be sick. And he just stared at me, didn't say a word. And so I took a breath and I thought, this isn't going to go away. And I felt inside of me saying, okay, all right. And he just did this. He just reached his hand out. And when I went to touch it, boom, we immediately started flying. And we were flying through the air. And as we came down, I could see that we were actually coming down right at my ranch, right in the middle of my ranch. And it's like one of those silly dreams that you have when you're flying and then suddenly you're walking fast to stop. And we both do that. And this spirit is walking in front of me. And he's picking these things out of the ground, these black spikes, it looked like. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, these are still energetic remnants from past civilizations that are in the earth that I'm clearing, because this is a sacred ground that needs to be reinvigorated. I said, okay. And I'm still just following behind him as we're walking. And I said, by the way, what's going on? And who are you? And he said, you can call me father. And I thought, well, yeah. And I thought, well, my father's dead, but you're not. Well, maybe it's another father from another lifetime. I really, it's so going so fast. And we walk a little further, and I can see on the left, there's a campfire, a huge campfire with a dozen ancient Native Americans just around it. And he walks up to it, and he turns to me, and he says, you have to understand that we're going to teach you, and we're going to train you in how to be one of us. And I thought, okay, but I don't even know who or what. And the short of it is, for the next 13 nights, every night he came to me, he put his hand out, we flew to the same spot of the ranch, the other 12 elders met us. And for a couple hours every night, they sort of downloaded me. I don't know how else to describe it, giving me this information, teaching me about ancient wisdom. And with it, they gave me a chapter of a book that they wanted me to write. And it was 13 nights and 13 chapters. And after the third night, because the father would give me the chapter first, he would kind of give me the information. And I felt it was almost like a seed that just came into me, and it had all of the information in it. And I would suspend it while I would go through this education with the ancients every night. And after the third night, I started to get really sick, where I was talking to my wife again. I said, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I said, I can't go through these dying experiences. And so that night when Father came, he said, look, we recognize that the physical body is not holding up to what we thought it would. So he created literally a seed, and it looked like this monster Easter egg. And he said, at the end of each night, I'm going to give this to you, and in it is the chapter. And that way you don't have to hold it in you while we go through the lessons. And when he put it in my hands, you could see the top had this incredible seam to it. This incredible white light was coming out of the seam. And when you moved your hands up, it opened up like a flower, and the words just came tumbling into me. And it was that chapter of that thing. And so at the end of the 2 to 3 hours every night, I would wake up, I would go downstairs, and I would write out what was the chapter in the book. On the 7th night, when I showed up, there was a much larger fire, and everyone was up, and there was a big celebration that seemed going on. And I said, what's happening? And they said, well, this is your night of rites. And I said, rites for what? And they said, we're going to, again, make you one of us. And one of the ancient natives walked over from the fire, and he tore off a small portion of his cloth. He had on an animal skin top and bottom, and he tore it off, and he handed it to me. And he said, sew this onto your shirt. And I turned to Father and I said, what is this? And he said, we don't have words for all these things. You ask all of these questions. And I'm like, okay, but what's going on? And he said, well, in ancient history, it's been called once or twice the exchanging of the cloth. And I still didn't quite understand it, but when I put it close to me, I could see it sewing into my own cloth. And he said, now, I want you to understand that we're going to give you your rights, and, we want you to take a section of Mother Earth, a square, and we want you to be responsible for the health of that section. We want you to make medicine for everyone that lives in that square, and we want you to look after Mother Earth's health in this square. And it happens to be a northern corner of Arizona, right where the ranch is. Okay, that makes sense. And do you agree to it? Yes, I agree to it. I mean, you're so, you're on the edge of dying. You're like, okay, whatever, I'm dying. So you're asking me these commitments in the future? I don't even know if I'm going to make it till tomorrow. Okay, sure. I agree. And it wasn't a cavalier, but just, it's just so impactful and so powerful. And you're just kind of, you don't even know what you're agreeing to. And I said, well, what are you making me? And he said, well, again, we don't have terms for it. And I said, well, you have to have some idea. It has to mean something to you. What are you making me? And they said the only way to explain it would be to be a teacher of other teachers, a shaman's shaman. I said, okay. And then they actually gave me a name within the ceremony, which was Konawak. It's a for the end, which I had misspelled 3 times. And he actually, in the dream, grabbed my mouth and made me say Konawak so that I could pronounce it properly. He said, this is the name that you have going forward, and this is what we want you to do. And the edict was to, number one, protect these ancient plants that are the greatest medicinal plants on the planet. And I said, well, I don't know what they are. And they said, we'll teach you. And they said, these make all of the medicines necessary for every living creature on the planet to survive. And they said, do you agree then to create a center that will protect these plants and then help others around the globe make centers that they can grow these plants also and make natural medicine for them and their communities? Okay, that's what I agreed to. And then there was a couple more things that they went through. And then he said, look, from this point on, the rest of the ceremony, you will not remember. It is sacred. It is not for you to understand. And I blacked out. And I woke up about an hour later, went downstairs, wrote down my experience and what I went through. And now 14 years later, I've been able to sort of decipher all of the things and what it really meant. I didn't at the time and at all, really. It just kept coming so fast. But what had happened is that when we get higher wisdom, when we get ancient wisdom, it actually has a frequency to it, just like our normal talking, but it is a higher frequency. So when you try to put that into a physical body on this level, it's like putting 10 volts in a 5-volt battery. It fries the physical body. So every time I would work with the book to try to publish it, to write it, I would get sick again. And I would continually fight this getting sick, trying to get the book finished. If I would try to rewrite the book, I would get sick. They didn't want a word changed. They didn't want anything interpreted. And it wasn't that they were so right. It's that they understood that when you put just the right words together, you elicit a response in the human body that allows them to think on a higher level. It's a very interesting concept. It's sort of like saying, look, you see the dog run. Okay, you think, all right, I see a dog running. But if you say, look, time is the only thing that's important, your brain goes, what do you mean the only thing that's important? And you start to think 50 different things. Well, is this time important? Do you mean a watch? Do you mean the future? Do you mean the past? So a combination of 5 simple words can elicit tremendous thought and tremendous understandings, where another 5 simple words put together doesn't do anything to you. So the book was written very simplistically, but it was put together in words such that every time that you read it, depending upon where you are, you'll actually get a different meaning from it. The 13 chapters, it is the path, karma, life force, coming earth changes, how to heal yourself, the physical body, the ethereal body. It was what they claimed it to be was a basic manual for how every person on earth used to understand what it was to be here. Sort of if you were an Atlantean, this is how you used to think. You used to realize lived many times. You used to understand you are simply a ball of energy inside of a physical body in a temporary time. You used to understand that to heal someone, you actually had to change the frequency and the energy of them, not cut into them, not give them drugs, actually change their energetic makeup. So it was a basic manual that they say that man had forgotten over the last 5,000 years. A basic understanding that every human being that used to live on this planet carried around with them. Now, their further explanation of it was that it wasn't that we got stupid. It wasn't that we abandoned it out of ignorance. They explained that the universe is this enormous sort of shell. Almost look at it as like a tunnel, right? And we, because now there's 100,000 million other planets that we've decided, that we finally realized, and there's a million other galaxies that exist. We, along with everything else, work in a complete rotation around that universal tunnel. We go in a complete circle. As you're traveling around in this circle on the inside of the universe, you get closer to other planets, to other galaxies, to other energies. And those planetary influences actually affect our thinking. They actually raise our vibration or lower our vibration. And so they explained for the last 2,000 years, we were in a part of the galaxy that was hidden from most of the rest of the planets in the universe. And because of that, we were in the dark ages. We were not getting the energies, the higher energies that exist in the universe. So we were not thinking in a higher way. And the Mayans described at 2012, not the end of the world, but a reuniting of the energies that exist in the rest of the universe that would change the planet, change the way we think, and change the way we live. So we just basically came back into the right neighborhood to start thinking clearly again. And the book was supposed to be sort of the introduction to help us remember how we used to think and live and treat the planet and each other, really. And at the end of 13 days, he came to me and he said, that's it. He said, for me to have come down to this level and to have communicated with you is an extraordinary event, and I will never be able to do it again. You will never see me again, but you are now a part of the other, and they will help you, these other ancient spirits, for anything that you need going forward. Because in ancient tradition, only true healers first heal themselves. That's just what they believe. They believe that great healers first have dying experiences, heal themselves, so that then they can help others do the same. I had to start finding ways of making medicine. So I started having dreams of this plant cures this, and this plant cures this. And if you put these two plants together, it will cure that. And I started to make medicine that started to cure myself. But it took me over a year to get functional again. I have to save grace for my family to put up with this. I mean, they never expected, I was this healthy, very successful human being that suddenly was crippled, couldn't do anything. And I went divergent too, as opposed to being so successful to suddenly all I care about is helping the planet. And it was confusing for everyone. But I had agreed, and I knew that they had said, look, you are only able to go forward and continue living if you agree to this new mission. What I will say was the most impactful to me, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, is that as I've started to understand even the book itself that I wrote, because I read it and go, I don't know where that came from. As I read it and start to learn myself, and I started to change the way that I lived, I can certainly understand and see how important it is. But how it connects to us is that every time that you have an illness, its purpose is to bring you back onto your path. The purpose of an illness is to make you change. And that is what's lost in our present understanding. Everyone thinks it's an inconvenience. Everyone thinks it's something that's bad that's happened to them. So what we find in our healing now that we try to teach people is that understand when the illness started. What were you doing? The parents were in the middle of a divorce. You were losing your job. There is 99.9% of the time a traumatic event happening in that person's life when that illness started. And that's what's connected to the illness. So until you address that issue, you will not be shown what is the physical remedy that will actually cure you. So it's not that physical remedies don't work, it's that they have to have a soul component to them for you to be able to actually have true healing. The ancients came to me last year and said, look, let's just take a normal person that's incarnate on Earth right now. They typically have had 40 to 50 lifetimes on planet Earth. That's here today because they've been around a long time. They said what they do as a spiritual entity that's lived 50 times is they take 4 or 5 of their lifetimes and they put them together into a new mini me. And they incarnate with the memory of those 5 lifetimes. And the purpose is to finish any of the lessons of those 5 lifetimes so that they evolve as a whole soul. So they lived as a carpenter, as a farmer, as a doctor. They now incarnate with those 3 lifetimes memories, and they have those skills, but they have those lessons that weren't finished. And their whole purpose for living this new life is to finish the last lifetime's lessons. So if they were a farmer in the 13th century and a doctor in the 15th century, their diet was very restricted. They maybe ate a little bit of poultry, but mostly greens and vegetables and rice. So when they come into a modern world, their body, their soul, doesn't accept the modern food, constantly rejects it. But the minute they get foods that are in conjunction and connected to their past lives, they're immediately satiated. And the way that they taught me, to me, was crazy. We were up north. Native American came to me, spirit, put his arm around me, and he flashed his hands up in the sky, and all the stars erased, like he had erased a blackboard. And then he threw up into the sky this diagram. And it was a big balloon with 50 small balloons inside of it, each of them a lifetime. And he said, look, and he just took 5 of the balloons and pulled it out of the 50. He said, this is a new incarnation. This is what comes into a physical body and tries to refine those previous lifetimes in a combined effort and in a complete purposeful effort. So I'm sure you've had people that had near-death experiences that said that they choose the family that they came into. Right? Well, because you actually stand on the precipice of the worlds, and when you agree to incarnate, you'll get a choice. They'll go, look, you can choose this family, this family, this family, and this family, because these 5 different family experiences relate to the lessons that you want to learn. This family will teach humility that you want to learn. This family will teach you poverty that will teach you this other lesson from this other lifetime. You can see how coordinated it really is. There's no randomness to our life at all. When I was 15, I did past life regression, and I experienced 2 of them in that session in the early 70s. And that was the 1500s. I was a farmer. I lost my parents. It was just my sister and I. We had raised each other. And then another where I happened to be a librarian. I was a woman in the 1700s, and I worked in a library. Incongruent, it seems. But the other 3 were all what I call geographical memories. I was in China when I connected to the Chinese places. I was actually walking down the street in a village that I'd lived in 1,500 years ago. I actually will go to a place that you lived in a past life, and it comes to you. It's like a thunderbolt. I touched this building, and suddenly the video just started playing in my head. So the last lifetime that I had was in the 40s, where I was actually a film and television producer. I found my old office in this lifetime from my previous lifetime. You know, and that sort of segues me into this concept that people talk about, well, how can a 5-year-old be a concert pianist? Well, he brought that lifetime forward. He was a concert pianist in his last lifetime, and that's one of his reincarnated purposes in this lifetime. He did it before. So when I became vice president of Paramount Pictures at the early age of only 30 years old, it didn't make any sense. Well, Yes, it did, because I'd done it just in the last lifetime. And I had that sense when I was very young. When I was 5 or 6, I knew I knew how to make movies. I didn't have the understanding. I just knew it. It was just in me. So when I got on a film set in my early 20s, it was immediate for me. It was just natural. And I went from being a production assistant to being a producer in less than 2 years. It had nothing to do with my practical experience. You know, people would just say, well, you have an instinct for this. Yeah, last lifetime. And again, you can't talk about it or bring it up to people, but that is the reality and how it happens. I would tell you one of the most important things that I saw in healing in the last year is that it all comes back to the purpose of your incarnation. So you can come back to my 5 lifetimes, right? 2 as an ancient Chinese, a couple of us, and as a film producer. So how would those work together, right? Well, the 2 lifetimes I lived in ancient China, I was a feudal warrior. All I did is go from town to town and fight. That's what you did back then in 600 AD. You got hired to fight whatever warlord was going on for a couple of years, and then you moved on to the next town and fought that fight. That's what I did. When I come into this lifetime, and I'm given the circumstances that I'm giving, what did I have to do? I had to fight for my life. And I had to find a way to right the wrongs to a certain extent. I fought in a purpose of trying to make the place better. I'm doing the same thing again in this lifetime. That's how they come together. You say, well, what about the librarian? Well, it's been incredible because I'm a voracious reader and have been since I was a child. And that's helped me tremendously. That's helped me become a writer. That's helped me do the work that I'm doing. That helps me be able to do these things that gets the message out to the people. So you can take those lifetimes and see exactly why I picked those 5 and made this combination into what I agree to do this time. So all illness then comes back to, if you are derivating from that path, if I didn't agree to become the healer and agree to write these books and agree to start helping and agree to start protecting these plants, I would simply exit. I would contract an illness, I would be gone. Because I would not be continuing the agreement that I have. Every time you incarnate with an agreement, and that agreement is you come to this planet if you agree to learn and you agree to evolve. And in these new channelings that we've done in the last year and a half, it's incredible information. It all ties back to the first book. All the information is the same, but it's almost like it's the workbook. It's like the explanation of what these simple understandings really mean. And to put it in a sort of concise bubble, the first 4 channelings are time, money, future, and negative thoughts. So you can't count money. You can't believe in time. Clock, time, it's a man-made thing. You can't live in the future, and you can't have negative thoughts. And they say that if you can take those 4 principles and concentrate on them every day, what it will do is force you to live in the present. Now, that's such a common term, but I know even myself, being in this for over 60 years, it still never resonated with me. Being in the present, what does it mean? Well, I guess it means you're supposed to be happy you're here. But now I understand, because they really mean it. They mean you never look at a clock. Ever. Ever. Because what it does is it constricts your ability to think. It constricts you're like, oh, I only have 5 minutes. That's not true. I'm constantly being proven that that's not true. I was doing some orders 4 or 5 months ago, and I had a feeling that the post office was going to close and I wasn't going to make them to the post in time. I didn't look at the clock. I said, well, I have an intuition that I should just keep going. And so I did. And I finished the order, and it was 10 minutes after 5, post office is closed. I then had the intuition, well, I should still go to the post office. I thought, well, and because you have to battle your mind. Your mind says, what are you, an idiot? You really going to listen to this stuff all the time? Put the stuff in the car, went to the post office. I thought, well, the grocery store is just a block past. I'll go to the grocery store if nothing happens. I pull into the post office. Sure enough, it's closed. I kind of chuckle to myself. And as I'm about to leave, I see the main gate open. And the head postmaster, who I know, is rolling out a cart because he's coming out to get all of the mail that's in the drive-through. And he sees me and he waves. And so I pull up to him and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I kind of had these packages, but you're closed." He said, "Put them in my basket." Put them in his basket. I didn't even have to get out of the car to go to the post office that day. But had I listened to the clock, I would have actually curtailed my ability to live in the present. I would have changed everything that I was doing. They say the same thing about money. The minute you count money is the minute you limit yourself. The minute you say, okay, I've got to raise $5,000 to buy a new car, I've got to work this many hours, well, that's it. You've just told the universe that the only way you're going to get a new car is if you work more hours at a job that you hate. And that means that nothing else can happen. No one can give it to you. You can't win it for the lottery. Your brother can't give it to you because he bought a new car and thought you needed one. Nothing else can happen but your limiting thought of, I must now make money to get my thing. Can't count money, can't count time, can't live in the future. How do you do that? How do you do it in the modern world? I got to make a dentist appointment next week. You have to start operating intuitively. When someone says, "What are you doing tomorrow?" you have to say, "Living." So, well, but what are you going to do? I don't know. When I wake up in the morning, I'll know. And they're like, "Well, no, you can't live that way." Yes, you can. That's how we lived for thousands of years. That's how the ancients lived. Do you really think the Atlanteans walked around with wristwatches on their wrist? No. All of that traps us into having limited perspective and not being connected to everything. Because the minute you pull back, you're not living in the future. You're not relying on money to create your things. You're not looking at a clock to determine when you should do things, how you should do things, and you have no negative thoughts. That's the other hard part. You will be in the present. It will force you to be in the present. And what that does then is that means that you start to connect to everything. Because the brain is not running this minutia. I mean, the majority of the people out there have 100 thoughts in their heads all the time. And that's what separates them from the creator and from the life force that exists amongst us. I can go a couple days at a time without any thought. It's the only key to connect to exactly what's going on. So when I get up every morning, like the ancients, they would go to the river, they would wash their face, they would cleanse themselves, they would give thanks to the four directions, and they would sit in silence to wait for their intuitive direction of what to do that day. They would then be guided that this field is going to have a deer so that you can feed your family. This creek has berries that are finally ripening that you can pick. The only way you can connect to everything is if you have no thought. That's the only way it can get in. The ancients believed that everything is like a radio station, right? You can only listen to one radio channel at a time. If you put on two radio stations at once, what do you get? Noise, right? Nothing's discernible. Well, that's how most people are operating. They have so much going on. There's no room for their intuition to be heard. There's no room for their soul to actually connect and direct them. So they teach us, change the station if you want to learn something or hear something, but you can only stay on one station at a time. And that's what frequency is really about. So again, it's a combination of things, right? The biggest thing, though, is our planet moved into a part of the universe that now energies are hitting us and forcing us to wake up. You see it around you. And the couple of other channels that I've known for a long period of time have gotten other information very similar and has said that it's creating a division of the masses. Because, well, what you're seeing is that People are embracing it and suddenly becoming awake and aware. And what someone would call a tree hugger is no longer this abstract anymore. They're starting to say, look, I can understand what you're talking about. I can see a flower. I can feel a tree. I can hear things. And the other half is saying, no, 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 no. I want to stay in my bubble. I want to have I want to have my big car. I want to have materialism. I want to be satiated on a physical level. I don't want to evolve. And because of that, they're fighting harder and harder to not wake it up. And that's why we're dividing. Is because half of the population is saying, no, we're waking up. We got to take care of this planet. We have to take care of each other. We have to respect every living thing on this planet. And the other half is saying, burn it down. Burn it down. Use every resource that there is. The planet will grow a new one. Don't worry about it. And they're forcing a divide further and further and further. But it is coming to a breaking point, unfortunately. And you can feel and see that. And that's because not only are we being forced by these outer planetary energies to change, but the Earth is being hit with those same energies, of course. That's why we're feeling it, it's because it's hitting the Earth. And if the Earth was healthier and not so polluted, it would be able to what we call transmute these energies easier. In other words, take them in and release them. But because the Earth is a little bit beat up, she's getting bombarded and not processing it so well. So what happens is for her to process all these extra energies, that 10 volts in a 5-volt battery, she has to find a way to release them back out. Earthquakes, major storms, rain, hurricanes, all these weather patterns that we are seeing is simply Mother Earth trying to balance herself from being hit with these higher energies. It's not a reaction to anything bad. You know, they're not condemning man for disrupting and being rude. I mean, man's being rude and he's polluting, but Mother Earth isn't rising up and saying, I'm going to kill all the people on the planet. That's not what this is about at all. She's saying, I'm being overwhelmed and I must find a way to release these energies so that I can stay in balance. 100 years ago, 93% of the population was self-sufficient. Today, less than 3% is self-sufficient. Its number one message was, we are not self-sustainable. And that is not the way forward. We have to return to becoming self-sustainable. That is the number one message from the ancients. You know, you can't go 3 days without water. And yet how many people have a stream or a water well? And we just agree to start buying bottled water? That's okay? Food. The average food in your supermarket travels 1,200 miles. Again, all these things are so out of balance. You start to heal yourself by simply growing your own plants. It's not a Pollyanna sort of like you should grow your own plants so that you can survive. It's much, much, much further than that. When you start to consume the things that you grow, you will see your health change 100%. But even further than that, like I said, if you really pay attention to it, you don't have to eat as much food because it's grown in such a perfect way with such great love that the consumption is smaller. But I digress a little bit because the answer is really, you have to start growing your own food. You have to start moving towards being self-sustainable, not just because there's not going to be food available, because that's the way this planet is supposed to be. The creator didn't go and make this incredible world so that some entity could come in and charge you money for water and for power and for food. Do you really think God created this world so that you have to make money so that you can survive? It is so out of control. It makes me mad. Mad, not angry, but in just, what? All of these resources are supposed to be free. We as human beings are supposed to enjoy the fruits of the earth, what it grows, what it has in terms of water, substance, making your own housing. All of that is supposed to be free. Why? so that you experience living on this planet in the way it's supposed to be, which is connecting to everything around it. And we've created this world where you go to work, you do your job, so you get your couple of dollars, so you go to your store, so that you eat, that you go to sleep, and you wake up and you do it again. That's not this planet. That is not the purpose of this planet. And that is not creating a spiritual evolution for anyone. Who is growing and learning, living that type of life? Start growing your own food, start becoming self-sustainable. And that is the path actually to your spiritual enlightenment, because it will connect you to everything you have been disconnected from.
My near-death experience was in 2021, Christmas. And before that, I am a wife, a mom, but I did have quite a unique job before. I was in mental health and addictions for maybe a decade. That's what I went to school for, was social work. But in 2015, I accepted my gifts as a psychic medium, a medical intuitive, a healer, and an animal communicator. It's hard to remember them all. So I always say I was born different. So I was like an 80-year-old, 3-year-old. It didn't make sense that I was a kid and doing kid things. I was always introverted, a little bit more quiet. And I could see people that other people couldn't see until I was about, I can't remember, 4-ish. I didn't know that other people couldn't see all the people I saw. So like, I just thought adults ignored some people and I didn't quite get why. Again, I was just mom, right? And I've always, with work, because I kind of make my own schedule, I take summers off to be with my kids and I take most of December off to be home. I'm a Christmas crazy person, which I don't know why, because horrible things always happen at Christmas, but I still love it. And it had been COVID. And in Canada, we did have like some pretty strict rules we had to follow. Even in 2021, that was going to be the first Christmas since COVID hit that I could have family and friends over. And I always have done, a huge Christmas Eve dinner with like 40 people. So I was so excited. But the few weeks leading up to it, it felt like weird. And I just thought, all of us probably feel like that because of COVID. We're leading up to Christmas and we did a day of like decorating gingerbread houses with the kids and my old foster kids and my husband. And it was an amazing day. And then at the nighttime, like 8 o'clock or something, we were going to watch a Christmas movie because it was December 23rd. We were all excited. The next day was going to be our first big dinner. But I started getting like the worst headache of my life, like so bad that I couldn't even see straight. So I'm like, you know what, guys, I'm just going to go to bed. I feel horrible. And apparently, like an hour later, I texted my husband and said, can you bring me some Tylenol and Advil? They were still watching the movie because my head hurts so bad. And he brought them. And apparently then I went into unconsciousness. Like I took the medication. And I thought fell asleep. The doctors think I probably started having the stroke around 11:30 at night. And I didn't wake up till 4:45 in the morning. And I woke up completely paralyzed on my right side and nonverbal. So I only could say 2 words, my sister's name and the F word, which is really great. Essentially, I tried to get up to go to the bathroom. I tried to stand up, not knowing I was paralyzed, and I fell to the ground. And then I couldn't move or get up, and I couldn't reach my phone or a light. So I tried to army crawl to the door and I couldn't. And so there was a wall and I hit the wall really, really loud. And it woke up my husband and actually my mom as well, because they were living in my basement suite. And my husband came into the room and I was clearly not well. He knew right away it was a stroke because he had some first aid training. So he called 911. We got me to the hospital. The damage was already done in the midbrain. And so they wanted to life flight me to another hospital because where I live, they can't do neurosurgery. They don't have a neurosurgeon. And so that's what they decided. I was going to be life flighted. They let Mike go with me. All my family came to say goodbye because the doctor essentially said more than likely she will die before she gets to the other hospital. So they even told Mike kids at the time were
Oh my
12 and
God.
14, and they said, say everything you can to your mom, because more than likely you won't see her again. And I took off in the helicopter with my husband beside me. And that is where I went to the other side. The sun hit my face, and my husband went to cover my eyes because I was also getting a fever, which can happen when you're sort of near death. Your body can heat up. And I looked upset because he was covering my eyes, because that sun hitting my face, as soon as it hit my face, I was in my body and then I wasn't. I was on the other side. Like, it was that quick. And I could see my body, I could see my husband, but then all of a sudden I could also see my kids driving to my house, and I could see my sisters, and I could see everything the whole time. But I also wasn't in my body. I woke up, or not really woke up, just opened my eyes. I didn't go towards the light. There was no tunnel or anything like that. I just woke up, opened my eyes, and I was in the most beautiful garden I have ever seen or experienced. I don't think Earth could have a garden like that. I opened my eyes. I was wearing a beautiful white dress, and my feet, I didn't have shoes on. My feet were on the grass, and looking sort of around me, I was in a field, but there was so many flowers, and there was like a little pond type thing, and then a gazebo that had like a creek running under it. And my guides, who I already knew because of my work, I worked with my guides all the time, were sitting/standing by the gazebo. And then sort of to the left was my crossed over loved ones. So 2 of my grandparents, my mother-in-law, my dogs, because that's helpful. And I just, you miss your dogs when they're on the other side. Mm-hmm. But then there were some things that I was like, well, that's a little bit odd, but not. One of my dogs that was still alive was there, but she was 17 and a half. And she actually ended up dying 4 days after the stroke when I was still in the ICU. So she was like, with certain people that have Alzheimer's, they're kind of in both places. And so I'm assuming that's why I could see my dog that was still alive. But also my husband and my kids were there. Because I was there to make the choice of whether or not I wanted to come back. I think for me, if the choice was leaving my kids to suffer, I obviously would have come back no matter what. So I needed to know that they were going to be okay, and I was going to be with them no matter what. And then kind of to the right and up, like the field there was a giant group of people from all time dimensions, past, present, future, all genders, all races, all cultures. And I know a lot of people don't believe in this, and that's okay, but that was all of my other lives. So it was just to show me the interconnectedness, I think, of our paths here, but also our sort of journey within our collective consciousness. And so as I was standing there, it felt like I was there for 50 years, 100 years. I could feel through the grass everything around me, and everything within my sight glowed with this almost golden sort of rainbow light that was the most love I have ever felt. There was no pressure, but there also was no words, like physical words. Not one word came out of my mouth, because everything was telepathic. You think it, and everyone around you knows it. They think it, and I know it. I didn't run up to like my Nana, I loved her so much. We were so close. And you'd think, you see somebody that's been dead for a decade or maybe more. I didn't run up to her and hug her, because you didn't need to, because you just knew what everyone was thinking and feeling, and you could feel their love through the love that was all around me. And so all of that I could pay attention to, while also checking on like my family. And it is very true that when somebody is dying, especially like I was obviously I'm young-ish. I was 40 when it happened.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bargaining. If you save her, I promise I will do XYZ. If you let her live until I can see her again, I will. Like, and almost all of them were bargaining, panicking. My sister, poor girl, I talk about her, and it's probably embarrassing, but anytime she's under stress or somebody's hurt or sick, she has a horrible belly, and she had to go from the hospital to her house, which is like a 10 to 15-minute drive, like not only panicking and bargaining, but really needing to get to a bathroom. But she didn't want to stop anywhere because she wanted to pack her bags to go. But also, it was Christmas. And the next day was Christmas Eve. And, you know, my sister has young kids, and everyone was panicked. Everyone was bargaining. Everyone was sad, but also everyone was shocked. So there wasn't a ton of like crying because they were shocked. And then I could also see me and my husband, because at that point I had gone into unconsciousness, and he was panicked. He doesn't like helicopters, so he was nervous for that. The weather was not great, so he was nervous for that. And unlike me, he knows nothing about medical anything. And so in his mind, it was going to be okay, and he wasn't going to listen to the doctor. So it was a lot happening at once, but for me, it was very peaceful. It didn't feel like a lot happening because it just felt like I was home and I was being given this amazing gift of time to make the decision on what I wanted to do.
Did you recognize them right away as your past lives? How did you know that was also you?
Because you know everything. As soon as you're there, you understand everything. I often say there are no whys. There's never a why. Why did I do that? Why did I make that choice? Who are those people? What do they want to say? There's no, the who, what, when, where, why, how doesn't exist on the other side. It just, everything makes sense. Not only did it make sense that I was so connected to all of those people and that they are all either living right now in this present time or other times or other dimensions, I also was very sort of connected to what I was going to do for the rest of my life if I stayed, and what all of my family would do for the rest of their lives if I chose to not come back. Nothing felt confusing. And I just knew, because even though they didn't look like me, a couple of them looked similar, but they didn't look like me. It was like they were all me. So I didn't need to kind of go, okay, who are you? Hello, when are you living? How are you living? It was like, oh, okay, I remember that life, and I remember what I looked like, and I remember that path and everything I did. You just know everything. I think it's a blessing and a curse, because I wanted so bad to remember absolutely everything, every moment, and the amazing, enlightening things I was learning and participating in. And even though I remember quite a bit of it, it does fade. I call it like human amnesia. So like the things that I got to see or feel or hear start to fade so that I will stay here. Because let me tell you, it's so much easier there. Coming back into a paralyzed, nonverbal body that couldn't eat or talk or do anything, I definitely wanted to go back.
Can you tell me more about your guides? Because I haven't heard about that in a lot of other NDE stories.
So I think, again, like it's unique to each person. So in a way, I think we do sort of manifest. And I think this is where people's argument of like, you made it up because you saw what you needed to see or wanted to see. And somebody else might just see black, or it might not feel good. And for me, I had a relationship already with my guides. My guides are Gail, Jessica, and Peter. And so Gail and Jessica were sitting there. Peter is a part of the collective consciousness. His name's not Peter. I named him that because his name is weird, like Ka or Ra or some weird thing. So it feels weird to call him that. So I don't. I call him Peter, which I know is weird, but it works for me. And I had such a close relationship with them already that I was able to recognize them and walk up to them. I think a lot of people see what they call either angels or a guiding light or something like that. because not everybody is meant to get to know their guides in each human life. And if you're not meant to, or if it's not part of your path, then they probably won't come and show up in your NDE. Maybe it will be a grandma or a loved one that says, oh, you know what, you have to go back, right? But not everybody will get that gift of their guides being there. But my guides, because they knew me so well and I had been working as a psychic medium in partnership with them since 2015, it just made sense that they were there directing me. And kind of cool to see their actual physical self. You know, when I do work, I can feel them. I can see them if I really need to, but not like concrete humanly. Like I couldn't touch them when I'm like now if they stand in the corner of the room. Whereas I got to hug them and I got to like actually feel their energy and like the guidance that they've been giving me my entire life. And they were so great at sort of helping me understand the outcomes of each decision. And also the things that would happen if I went back. And I think that was super helpful in making the decision. And I could argue that no matter what, I was going to come back because we do plan our lives. And I needed the NDE and I needed to go to the other side in order to sort of live the rest of my life. But it did feel like a decision. Like no matter what, there was no judgment. And whatever way I wanted to go, they were there for me.
Were you presented with a decision, or did you just know coming there you had to decide whether to stay or to go back home?
I think I just knew because, again, you don't have to necessarily talk. But while being able to sort of see everything, they also helped me to see and understand the good and the bad and the ugly. So they did say, you know, if I chose to go back, the next 18 months would be the hardest time of my life. And I would regret my decision. I would wish that I had stayed and I would be very angry. And it was really true. When I woke up, I was on a high for 2 or 3 days. And I had this glow of the other side and it very quickly went away once I realized, oh, wow, like I'm paralyzed. I can't talk. I have tubes everywhere. I've been tube fed. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I was so brain injured. And all the things that they said I would do, I was like, yeah, right. Like, obviously I was dreaming because how am I going to get to where they said I would be, you know, doing like public speaking and talking about the collective consciousness and writing books and like inspiring people. How will I do that if I can't talk? You know, how can I do that if I can't walk? And I didn't understand that, you know, what they said was actual reality, especially because the doctors were pretty much saying, you know, yes, okay, she's survived. Because my husband actually decided not to do the brain surgery. We got there and I very quickly had a grand mal seizure. And then I continued to have seizures until they got a bunch of meds in me and helped stop it. And once they got the seizures stopped, the neurosurgeon came to my husband and said, you know, I know she came here for brain surgery, but the damage is kind of done. They did another scan and like my stroke was completed. The other one had stopped and I had TPA, which is a very, very strong blood thinner. And so surgery is super dangerous after TPA. And so he said, you know, I can still do the surgery if you want, but more than likely it will kill her. And so much damage is done. It would be minimal improvement after the surgery. And my husband had no idea what to do. And there was nobody else there. It was just him. And so he said to the neurosurgeon, you know, if it was your wife, like if it was your wife in that bed, what would you do? And the neurosurgeon said, I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't. And my husband said, well, you're the expert. I'm not doing it. And so I didn't get the brain surgery. And I think the doctor then just sort of said, how she is how she's staying. And he said, you know, as she's in the ICU, if she survives this in the next couple of days, you're going to have to start looking at long-term care. She's going to need care for the rest of her life. Pretty much she's going to stay how she is. I also was blind in my right eye. So I would be half blind, nonverbal, paralyzed, never able to eat because I had no swallowing reflex. I had no bathroom cues or hunger cues. So I wouldn't be able to ever take care of myself. And everybody was like, that's what everybody was saying for that first couple of days. And everybody talked about me around me. So like I couldn't say anything. And yet the doctor's in the room saying like, this is her. She's pretty much a vegetable forever. I think for the type of stroke I had, your 5-year survival rate is between 14 and 28%. So it's not great. But then I went from paralyzed, nonverbal, couldn't eat, couldn't drink. By day 4, I was walking. I had words within a few days. Not good and not expressive. I lost tone. So like I talked like a robot and I talked kind of like a baby. But I started walking. I got the tube out of my nose. Like I started eating after a few days. I was able to go to the washroom. They took like the catheter out and everything. And within a week, I was up and moving around. They were still doing a lot of tests. I was still in the neuro ICU for 2 weeks. But they couldn't explain it. And also when I woke up from going to the other side, I wasn't blind anymore. And they can't understand it because I was completely blind. And so I think 6 weeks, like you go for a follow-up 6 weeks after you get out of the hospital. And I went and I had a walking stick because I was still learning to walk, but I could talk, I could eat, I could whatever. I was doing rehab. And the neurosurgeon actually called down to the emergency room to see if anybody who was there when I was brought in wanted to come up to see me walk because they just could not. Because I was young and my kids were there and it was Christmas and all these nurses were just devastated that this was going to be my life and that these kids had their mom taken away on Christmas. And in my chart at the very top, it says I am his miraculous patient. That the only reason is a miracle because I shouldn't be here. So every time I go in, because I've had a lot of health complications, the doctors look and they're like, "Oh, so you're his miracle patient." I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." So the stroke was in the middle of the night on the 23rd. I stayed unconscious for almost 24 hours after the seizure. So that was just December 24th. On December 25th, actually, my husband, have you watched that movie, The Santa Claus, where they go to Denny's on Christmas because he burned the turkey? Anyways, that's what my husband did. He took the kids to Denny's for Christmas dinner. And they came and visited me, but I was in the neuro ICU. So it's like you can visit for 15 minutes or something like that. And the neurosurgeon just happened to be coming by. And I still hadn't talked or moved much. And he said, "You know what, you guys, I know your mom can't talk, but have you tried singing with her? Because speech is on the left. Well, speech is a bit confused, on the left, but singing is on the right." And so they sang with me and I sang without being able to talk 2 songs with them, 2 Christmas songs.
Wow.
And so for them, that was like a Christmas miracle. But no, Christmas was on pause. We celebrated Christmas the day after I got home in January. But like, I think my first like video that they recorded of me was like the 27th or 8th when I walked. So it was still, even though it was amazing and a miracle, it was a freaking slow one. And it felt like dragging my feet through cement for every gain. It didn't come, even though they said, "Oh, wow, it's amazing." For me, it didn't feel like that. It felt like it was impossible. And I felt like such a burden because to learn to talk again, you have to, so like one word, they would say the word, I wouldn't be able to say it. They would show me how to say it and then make me repeat it 7 or 8 times to try and get it stuck in my head. And we did that nonstop. And I also was kind of like a baby, like you have the emotions of a child. And so I was explosive. I would cry or laugh at inappropriate times, which is just part of having a stroke. And I was angry, and angry that this is their life now. And I just couldn't understand why I made this choice. And I had such a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that, I'm making my kids and my husband suffer. Like, it felt almost selfish that I chose to come back. Not forever, but for quite a while. I also was on very, very strong anti-seizure meds. And it made me not only feel very, very sick, it made me have the urge to unalive myself, which is a side effect of certain seizure meds. So usually when that happens, it's just like people who take antidepressants and anti-anxieties. Sometimes the medication doesn't agree with them. And so you have to switch. They tried switching me. It almost killed me. So I had to stay on that medication for 6 months to protect my brain. And so I was battling, trying to recover, doing rehab, struggling with my process, and trying not to give in to the side effect of that medication, which is super hard. I was very open and honest. I talked to my family. I got counseling and stuff. They all knew it wasn't actually me. I didn't want to, but it was the medication, and there was nothing I can do about it. I always say it was like a Bad Country song, because it's like I had the stroke. I also then got COVID. My whole family got COVID. The COVID almost killed me. Then I got COVID pneumonia. One of my dogs died when I was in the hospital. Then my next dog died in March. And that was like so devastating. Like, it was just like one after the other. And then every time it was like, okay, I feel a little bit better, something else would happen. Somebody would get in an accident, or somebody would get sick, or I would get sick, or I would have a TIA, or, it was nonstop. My guides were very right that the next 18 months would be hell. And it was. The first 6 months was the hardest. They also took my license because I had a seizure. So when you have a seizure, you have to go on medication, and then you have to be seizure free when you get off that medication for however many months. So I lost my license for the first year. But it just slowly kind of got better. And as I got more independent, it got better. And then the sort of cycle of every time I had a positive, a negative would come, or 10 negatives would come, it started just going away, and started like better things started happening. And then I just started feeling inspired again, and my guides started sort of speaking up again. I felt very disconnected from them for a while. And at one point they said, you need to paint. You need to try to paint what you saw on the other side. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm brain injured. I can barely write. What do you mean I'm going to paint? That's ridiculous. So I ignored them for a good couple of months. And then finally, like, just try. And I started painting, and I couldn't stop. And I tried the best I could to start to paint what I saw on the other side. And it just got better. And then things were presented, opportunities, people asking me to tell my story, which they said I would do that. And it was going to be so helpful to help people not feel alone. Like, this human world is so isolated. Like, we've never been more connected and more disconnected at the same time. It's such a strange world we live in, and everything just started happening for the better. They had said I would write 3 books, and I'm like, can't type anymore, can't write anymore, barely have words. I don't know what you're talking about writing a book, but everything just fell into place. And every single thing they said was going to happen has happened so far. And so now I just work on faith that, there's a point to all of it, because it's still hard, even though if you didn't know me, you wouldn't know. I know all the time, every single day. I am missing almost 25% of my brain, and it doesn't grow back. I don't know why I thought it did. In my mind, I just thought, when you injure your brain, yeah, your brain's injured, but it's still there. No, it sloughs away, and you have a giant hole in your head. And so then you can have other little strokes because all of that brain isn't supposed to be exposed. But it just started happening for the better. And I don't know another way to explain it other than I just had faith that they wouldn't have put me and my family, or I wouldn't have, because I planned this life, and my family through this if there wasn't a purpose for it. I am not a patient person, and I have learned more patience for myself and for other people. But also, my whole life, I felt so alone. And, even with my kids and my husband and family and friends, I could be surrounded in people. And I just felt like nothing made sense and that I was kind of this lone island. And going to the other side and understanding that there was not one moment in my entire life where I was ever alone, not even a millisecond. My hardest times in my life, I was surrounded and people who loved me. I think that was a huge takeaway for me because my whole life I felt so different, and I just felt like I never fit in any group, even people that I knew loved me. I felt like there was something wrong with me. And occasionally still, not occasionally, 50% of the world does think there's something wrong with me. It's not okay to talk to dead people as a job or as a calling. It's not okay to talk about these things, not in a religious tone or whatever it is. But I have never felt more like I belong than when I'm thinking of and talking about the things that I now know to be true. Before I accepted my gifts, it was very out of control. Like they were just always there and I didn't understand. I could see them, but I didn't know how to talk to them. Like I couldn't have a back and forth like we're having.
Okay.
And so it was just confusing because there was all these extra people around and I didn't know what they wanted, or even if they wanted something, like maybe they were just hanging out and they actually didn't want anything. Once I accepted my gifts, they only would come around for a purpose. So it wasn't like they were just always around me. Occasionally they are now just in support, but I knew what they wanted. I knew how to talk to them and how to get the message across. I didn't know how to set boundaries. So in the beginning, I live in somewhat of a smaller town. It's not tiny, but a smaller town. And they would want me to go up to people in like restaurants and stuff. And I was like, no, thank you. That absolutely, like, how long before the whole town thinks I'm completely nuts? And so I learned how to set boundaries. It's not okay to say, you need to go tell that cashier that, her mom is with her and whatever. So I started to be able to set boundaries. And my gifts didn't sort of turn on all at once. The mediumship was first. And then my psychic gifts. And that's the one I fought the most because when I was religious and I was still going to church when I accepted my gifts, the psychic was the part that they were like that's like, what do they call it? A false prophet. And so that part was harder. And then after a while, I'm also an empath, like a super strong empath. So I always say I can read souls. I don't necessarily listen to sometimes what's coming out of people's mouths because I know how they feel behind those words. Not good for relationships because sometimes nobody wants you in their head and they don't want you tuning into their soul. So it's a lot of boundary work. And then the medical intuitive and the healing came, and then the animal communicating came after that. And so for me now, it's just everyday life. And I have what I call like a light switch. So when I'm working, the light switch is on. So right now, even though this is more like an interview about me, the light switch is on. My guides are standing in the corner of the room, helping me to tell the parts that they really want to be heard, as well as my stuff. And their thoughts become my words. So when I'm actually working, I sort of put my human self to the side because I think I'd get really tired if I didn't. And their thoughts, just like on the other side, that it's telepathic, their thoughts become my words. So I don't, before the NDE, I would kind of have to listen and then repeat. which is okay. But I think a lot can get lost in translation, or like maybe I don't interpret it correctly, or I put emphasis on a different thing than they were intending. And then after the NDE, once I had the experience of complete telepathy, it's so much easier, which is crazy because I'm missing so much of my brain. I don't know how it's so much easier, but literally they think it and their thoughts come out of my mouth. So I don't have to interpret. I don't have to listen and repeat. I don't have to clarify. Once in a while, I argue if they're trying to say something that I'm like, really, you think that's going to be helpful, or it makes me uncomfortable? Like, oh, I don't think I want to say that to that person. But it's so much easier now. And I can do it like in a much more connected way, if that makes sense. I want everyone to know that they are never, ever alone. I have guides, and that's wonderful, and I can see mine. But so do you and everyone listening. It doesn't matter what your religion is, what your beliefs are. You can be an atheist or a Catholic or Jewish, whatever. Every human on this planet has guides, has a higher energy, whatever you want to call it, source, God, doesn't matter. There's somebody walking with you every moment of your life. And people don't have to believe that I had an NDE and went to the other side and got to make the choice and that sort of stuff. That's fine. And you know what? Like, I know there are people that really think our brains can do that, right? Can have this crazy dream and that sort of stuff. But all of the things that have happened since, all the things they said would happen, have all happened. And I think it's just testament that they are with me and they weren't lying, and I'm not making them up. But just that we aren't alone, and that there is a purpose to everything. Our collective consciousness as a whole is growing, and we are going to be seeing more and more people like me being born. You know, in the 80s when I was born, it was nuts to be a psychic medium. Like you called the 1-900 number, the 1-900 dial a psychic, and you paid like $2 a minute to get your astral, whatever. It wasn't average. It wasn't normal. It wasn't common. But as the collective consciousness is moving towards becoming more connected, more children are going to be born like me, feeling like they don't fit, feeling completely alone, even as a small child. And if there's somebody that can tell them, hey, you know what? There's a reason you feel alone. There's a reason you feel like you're so different. And it's because you're this wonderful little soul that's lived a lot. And, you know, you're going to get it. You're going to feel like you make sense at some point. It would have been so helpful for me when I was young if somebody could just say, there's nothing wrong with you. You know, you are not this horrible person who is causing bad things to happen. It's actually not you causing them. That would have been so, so helpful to me.
Can you tell me about your book?
Yes. So it's called At the Stroke of Eternity. And I started writing it. It came out a year ago. And so somebody helped me. So I talked and they typed. And it's also written, now looking back, like I would change so much just because I didn't have a lot of words. Like I was still learning to talk. And so it is a very simply written book, but it talks about everything. So a little bit about my childhood, and then about the stroke, going to the other side, and then all the lessons that I learned. It also has pictures because I like pictures in a book. Oh, here, I'll show it. So there you go. It's right here.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it has pictures. It has poems at the beginning of every chapter because I also wrote poems. I wrote poems before the stroke. I'm just trying to see if my brain is there, because I know people don't believe me when I say like I'm missing so much of my brain. Oh, there we go. There's my brain. So, whoops. This is the main stroke,
Oh my
that big
God.
white area, and then a frontal lobe stroke. Because people afterwards, so many people were like, yeah, right. Like I've known people who have had strokes. You have not. I'm like, I don't think I could fake a stroke like that. It doesn't necessarily make sense. But then, yeah, I also started painting. And so some of my paintings are in there as well. I don't do anything with the paintings. They just kind of sit here. But I enjoy it. I have fun with it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and then each one of my guides has a chapter at the end. So there's a chapter for Gail, Jessica, and Peter. And then, there's chapter on boundaries because it's so important when you want to do any type of spiritual work. One on being an empath because it's hard. It's hard to feel everybody's feelings, especially in this world when there's so much anger and hate and that sort of stuff.
Thank you so much to Amber for sharing her story. This was one of the interviews that I've been most excited about, and I hope you all enjoyed. My name is Lauren, and I do the interviews on this channel. And first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for all the really nice and really interesting comments that you've been posting. And second of all, if you want to see more of these types of videos, make sure to hit subscribe. Bye.